Hola, amigas, and welcome to episode 1 of Gold Hoops and God. I am your host, Dr. Guerra. This podcast is designed for Millennial Latinas and is fueled by faith and culture. Welcome, everyone. I'm super excited to have you join me on this podcast. I decided recently to start this podcast for a lot of different reasons. As I mentioned in the preview, I really felt called to create this type of content because it's something that I haven't really seen available out there. I wanted to create something that addresses Latina culture, but also does a deep dive into faith and faith broadly defined. So, as many Latinos, I was raised Roman Catholic, but I also embrace other forms of spiritual practices, which we'll get into, throughout the course of the podcast. So, faith and culture. I really wanted to focus on faith and culture because they have become so foundational in my life. They have always been very important to me, but in the last few years, even more so. I want this podcast to be a source of empowerment and inspiration for Latinas. I have gone through what I would call an exponential growth within myself the last couple years because I was forced to. So I mentioned this briefly in the preview. I had what I would call a tower moment in the summer of 2020. So, if any of you are familiar with tarot and tarot cards, the tower moment is when it all falls down. So, it's a moment in when, when an aspect of life, or perhaps even several aspects of life, just kind of fall apart. The illusion is broken, rather. And honestly, it's often a good thing. It's often a good thing. So, some tower moments, for example, it could be, a bankruptcy, divorce, dealing with mental health or physical health issues. When you're going through it, it is awful, right? However, coming out the other side, you really do build a deeper sense of strength. You build a deeper sense of fortitude and a new understanding of self. So that's essentially what happened to me during summer 2020. So, of course, the whole world was going through a pandemic, which started approximately, we went into lockdown around March 2020. And I had two different bipolar episodes later in summer 2020. Why am I sharing this with you? Because it really was a turning point in my life. And on top of everything, there's still a huge stigma against mental health in general. And so I feel called to kind of put that out there. And essentially, thinking about the tower moment, I had to reboot my whole system. In speaking in computer lingo, I had a motherboard that crashed, we shall say, and I had to completely reboot. It took a long time. I would say at least a year or two before I even semi felt like myself again. And that was through a lot of intensive work with therapists, both psychiatrists and psychologists, medication. Um, you know, they have helped me tremendously. So I am have no shame in saying that on the podcast. So the biggest, and again, going back to why is she sharing this? So the biggest piece of wisdom that I have for for us to kind of begin with is that we have the tools to change our lives already within us. It's been there all along. But the problem is that so many of us are really focused on, especially as women, especially as Latina women, we're focused on taking care of everybody else, on taking care of children. If you're in that sandwich generation, you may be taking care of children and aging parents, which is very exhausting. Trying to be a good spouse, trying to be a good partner. Perhaps you're going to school. I mean, juggling all the things, trying to get ahead in one's career. So much so that we oftentimes don't even have time to think. Quite literally, we don't have time to think. We don't have time to reflect. We don't have time to pray, anything like that. So I'm really encouraging everyone listening to kind of to take a moment and pause and really think about where you're at in life. And perhaps everything is going really smoothly, and that's awesome. And perhaps there are things that you would like to change. And I think it's good, every so often to check in with ourselves and ask ourselves, is this the life I really want? Or is this the life I was told I should have? Or is this a cultural expectation, right? Any number of those. Some of those are one and the same, but really to take that moment of self reflection, I think is so critical. And I also want to share this concept. This is a bit more in the theology, Christianity realm, but there's a concept in theology called the imago Dei, the sense that we are all created in the image and likeness of God. In other words, we are already very sacred and special and empowered as human beings. And a quick footnote, if you don't necessarily identify with Christianity, please, please, please don't get thrown off by my use of the word God. God can mean so many things. And if it helps you to think in terms more of like source or universe or energies or love or any, it, please, by all means, go for it. Because I know that people have we're all coming into this with our own different belief systems and perspectives. So in this journey, I have to say I'm very grateful for educators. I'm grateful for the good educators that I've encountered throughout my life because they've always encouraged me to ask difficult questions. And especially in terms of faith, to ask the difficult questions about God, to ask questions about the meaning of life, my purpose, all of those kind of things. And I'm really grateful for that. Shout out to Immaculate Heart High School and Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. And so I really encourage us, like as we begin this journey together, to begin to harness that fire within. In a lot of ways, I feel like I was built for this path. My last name literally means war. Okay. Guerra in Spanish means war. So I definitely feel like I'm equipped with a warrior spirit. My birthstone is diamonds, as you know. Diamonds are forged in a lot of struggle, right? Pressure makes diamonds. And I'm a fire sign. So there you go, right? All the elements to kind of build me into the character of just not backing down and always pushing forward. And actually, there's another concept that I wanted to introduce as we begin kind of our time together is this concept of a late bloomer. Okay, now on a personal note, this is a term that has always really bothered me. And let me explain why. Because late according to who, right? I feel like everyone has such a unique path. Everyone's life is so unique, and the order in which things happen may be different, right? There's people who had children, got married, and went back to school. There's people who didn't have children until much later in life. There's people who choose not to get married. There's right, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many variations and possibilities in this road of life, right? And so the sense of being late is really unfair. And I wanted to give some examples of why I really believe that is. So, if you've ever been to, for example, like an airport lounge or a restaurant where they have a row of clocks, right? And so they have the clock set at a different time. And this is more conversation, this part of the conversation is more about time. So you'll have a clock that's set to a time in Tokyo, Chicago, Lima, and New York, for example. In that moment, all of those are true. In that moment, all of those times are correct. In other words, those clocks are reading the correct time. So time is an illusion. Time is an illusion. And if you've ever traveled, done like a long distance trip, you know how jet lag can hit, and you know how sort of disorienting it is to be in a completely different time zone where you wake up and it's, 5 p.m. when it's 8 a.m. where you're from, right? For example. So I really just want to emphasize that it's never too late to start. It's never too late to start anything, any project, any business, anything that you want to start. And so that's why I feel that this concept of the late bloomer is such a myth and it's so unfair. It's never too late. It's never too late to make a change, to learn something new, to start a company, to fall in love. Like all of that is within possibility. And I came across an article from Business Insider that actually gave some great examples of famous people that we're all familiar with, that talks about like their road and how they made it big essentially after 40. So, for example, Toni Morrison. So, Nobel and Pulitzer Prize winning author Toni Morrison, she didn't write The Bluest Eye until age 40. So she was, well into her age when she first wrote The Bluest Eye. She happened to be working at Random House as an editor when that happened. She didn't win the Nobel Prize in Literature until 62. Another person, really interesting story, Vera Wang, who you may know from women's fashion, women's wedding dresses, etc. She does a lot of high fashion. She was originally a figure skater and a journalist before she entered into the fashion industry at the age of 40. So again, starting a little bit later in life, but is it really later in life? That's what I'm kind of pushing back against, is to really take a moment and take stock of where you're at and where you would like to be. And another really famous person who I enjoy is Julia Child. She wrote her first cookbook at 50 years old, and she obviously launched an incredible career as a celebrity chef around 1961. So these are all very famous women who got their big break sometime after 40 years old. And I think that's really important to remember in our society that is so obsessed with youth, right? We live in a youth obsessed culture to where oftentimes we as women feel that we have expired, that we will never get to make our dreams come true because we are of a particular age. And that's just simply not true. And it's simply not fair. I also know people personally who have completely changed their careers, from, for example, I know people who were veterinarians and then became professors in a completely different field. I know a person who used to be in real estate and now does like Reiki healing. So there's a lot of people that can completely pivot and change their direction. It's honestly a matter of taking the leap. It's a matter of, as Nike says, just do it. Just do it. Do it scared. Do it nervous. Do it when you don't have all the pieces figured out. Just do it. That's the only way. And as many of you probably already know, when people in their elderly years, when people reach 80s, 90s, etc., it's honestly, in reflecting on their lives, folks will say that they had regrets about the things they didn't do. Right. And again, this is maybe very familiar concepts and information for people, but it bears repeating. So people will say, I wish I had spent more time with my kids. I wish I had gone on that trip to Greece. I wish I had, started a, I don't know, a classical music channel on YouTube. Whatever the case may be, whatever floats your boat, go for it, do it, make it happen. There's truly nothing holding you back but yourself. Again, this is a huge revelation. This was a huge revelation for me post pandemic because, like I mentioned, I had to start from scratch. And just a little background. So much of my identity was tied up, is still to this day. So it's a little bit, I kind of hesitate to say was or is, being an educator, being a professor is something that I worked really hard to do. And especially as a first generation person, my parents did not have the opportunity to go to college. So to have made it, to have graduated from Berkeley with a PhD in theology, that's my degree, by the way, folks. That's where I'm coming from. You know, it was a huge, is still a huge accomplishment. And there was a time period there shortly after I got diagnosed that I was not sure. I was not sure what was going to happen next. I was not sure if I was going to be able to write or teach in a classroom again or keep up with the speed of academia, the demanding schedule that academia kind of forces upon people. So it's been a lot. It definitely has been a lot. And again, I share this to say we're in this together. I'm on this road as well. I'm learning as we go as well. And I do think that there are some pearls of wisdom that I have been able to attain so far. So, really, life is a process of both learning and unlearning. So, we learn new concepts, new ideas. I think that being a lifelong learner is such an important thing, it's such a beautiful thing. And that continues outside of the classroom, right? I think for many people, leaving high school or leaving college, that's kind of the last time we pick up a book or do that kind of self study. And really that's something that can continue for the rest of our lives. There's always more things to learn. Like this, honestly, it's limitless when you think about the amount of knowledge that's out there. And by learning and unlearning, so learning, I would say, I mean like new concepts, new information, new ways of being. As far as unlearning, I'm referring to the things that no longer serve me. There were so many things that I had to let go in order to move forward. For example, people pleasing. I was a very notorious people pleaser many years ago. That's something that I've had to overcome. And I know, especially in therapy or in the mental health sphere, there's a lot of talk of boundaries, right? Learning boundaries, having strong boundaries. It's so critical. And so, this unlearning of things is a part of the process. It is part of the process of growth. And so, throughout the series, I'm really going to encourage you, my listeners, my dear amigas here on the podcast, to begin working on your intuition. So women, it's often said that women have a sixth sense. Again, I think what happens is that we ignore it, or we've been taught to kind of doubt it, to doubt it, to doubt ourselves. And so there is definitely room for everyone to kind of begin to harness that capability because we all have it. So, as any good professor, as we wrap up our first episode, I need to give you homework. So, what I want you to do is to take some time this week, be it 5 minutes, 10 minutes. This can be in the shower, this can be on the drive home, whenever you have a pocket of time. That's also a really important concept. We don't necessarily need 2 hours of undivided like focus. Focus is important, don't get me wrong, but even finding 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour to ourselves is so important. So I encourage you, find a pocket of time this week and think about, what are the things that light you up? What are the things that light up your heart? What do you get most excited about? And then what are some ways you can do more of that? How can you incorporate more of that into your schedule, into your day? And I encourage you to also to take one small step this week. Okay, so that could look like a couple different things. You can sign up for a class. Let's say you've been wanting to learn guitar forever. Go for it. See if a city college near you is offering guitar classes, or if there's a music center near you, or maybe you know someone who plays guitar who's willing to sit with you. Offer them like some pizza and it's like, hey, teach me how to play the guitar and let's have lunch together or something. Um, you could even share skills. So, for example, with the guitar example, maybe you have a friend who plays a guitar and you are really good at baking. It could be a swap, right? You teach me how to play the guitar and I'll show you how to bake, for example. These are just examples, folks. Fill in your own desires, of course. So whatever it is, go for it. It could be gardening, it can be drawing, anything, whatever floats your boat, whatever makes you happy, go for that. And I think a big part of the process too is healing, pardon, is reconnecting with our inner child. For some reason, we really stop playing. Life gets so serious and so boring. And I really encourage you to capture that spark, ignite the fire within. Like, what are the things that really made you happy as a little kid? Maybe that means, for me, it means like buying something from the Sanrio store. I loved Hello Kitty growing up. The pencils and erasers and those kind of things. It could be something like that. Anything at all. It could be watching cartoons. I'll watch SpongeBob SquarePants or Powerpuff Girls if I want a little boost of like happiness in my day. Why not? And finally, I highly recommend journaling. Um, Journaling is such a wonderful way to get those emotions out, to process things, to process feelings. And, again, pockets of time. It can be 10 to 15 minutes before going to sleep or right when you wake up. Those are kind of the two really great times to incorporate them into your schedule, into your day, rather. Um, yeah. And so I will leave it there, my dear amigas. This has been really fun. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you received some benefit and some new insights from this first episode. And as I mentioned, I want this podcast to be helpful to you, to my audience. So let me know in the comments, what type of topics do you want me to cover? So this podcast is about gold hoops and God. So I'm happy to talk about pop culture, about music, about faith, any number of topics. And I will be having guest hosts join me in the podcast as we grow. So thank you so much for listening. And until next time, ciao.